This is your host, Stephen Sargeant, Around the Coin podcast. We just had Aidan Larkin to talk all about his CEO and co founder journey for the startup Asset Reality. They've taken over digital and physical asset recovery, but he breaks down the process of being VC backed, going through as a CEO, the trials, the challenges, the successes of building in a space that's heavily dependent on regulations, regulators, and digital asset adoption. It's a crazy story. Every time I speak to Aidan, it's something new, it's something different, and he comes and he brings the heat, including imposter syndrome and being a CEO and self-awareness. If you're into crypto, if you're a payments tech founder, investor, this is a great episode to bring all of that together. Reach out to me or Aidan if you love the podcast. This is your host, Stephen Sargeant, Around the Coin podcast. Usually I don't bring my friends on the podcast, but this time I'll make an exception because he's just an amazing operator. He's super knowledgeable about everything crypto, digital assets, seizures, but he also has some really cool stories about seized Lambos and yachts. And he's like big into the investment world. And I don't think people give him enough credit for it. And we have Aidan Larkin. He's the co-founder. And now you're pretty much the CEO of Asset Reality. Why don't you give us a little bit, give us the two-liner of yourself and Asset Reality, and then we're going to jump into your background, get into everything that's going on in the digital asset world, especially in the US and the UK when it comes to seizures.
More than happy to. Thank you. Yeah, it's not a chore to come and sit and talk to you. I really appreciate the offer to do this more off topic than what we normally talk about. So Asset Reality exists because there is a multi-trillion-dollar asset recovery sector that most people don't know about. It affects the tax we pay, our global security, terrorist financing, all of the things fundamentally that fuels this multi-trillion-dollar sector of illicit assets. It's really difficult to seize assets, and there's no tools or technology. So at its core, Asset Reality has built an end-to-end platform to make it easier to seize assets. We've seen disruption in other sectors where, like Flexport and shipping, taking a very analog industry that's never really had tech applied to it and just bring in these technology solutions. So that's what we're doing. We're helping government agencies and asset recovery practitioners seize, manage, liquidate assets and just give them the technology they need that will ultimately improve asset recovery as a sector, which is important for all of us.
And I love that because I think anyone that's in tech knows about Flexport, and anyone that's dealing with e-commerce or shipping understands how complex. And anytime there's something that's complex, it's expensive, right?
Yeah.
And it costs everybody, especially the end consumers. But you started off working as a tax inspector, and based on your characteristics and your bravado, that seems like a really weird job for you, Aidan. Tell me a little bit about your early career working for the tax authority in the UK.
Yeah, it's like the most hated job. It was the most hated man in America. That the Netflix, the hated woman in America. Being a tax inspector is usually a bit of a conversation killer. I used to love getting into the back of like a taxi on the way from the airport, and like, what do you do? Tax inspector. And they would just put their head down. But it was a fascinating job. I joined there. I left school at 16. I wasn't happy in school. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't want to go and just do a degree for the sake of doing a degree. And there was an opportunity to basically join like this, a little bit of work, a little bit of like college part-time on the side. And I started to do that because I just couldn't figure out. And all the while my mum worked in, back then it was known as inland revenue. So for like US and Canada, it's like IRS, sort of the equivalent. And then inland revenue merged with customs in the UK, and we had HM revenue and customs. And so that opportunity came up to join this just a huge public sector organization. And it was always the thing. And I am the cliche. I literally started in the mailroom. I was literally the mail person, opening the mail and distributing the mail throughout the building. And then those organizations are just great at just, putting your head down and sort of working through. And an opportunity come up to join a development program internally. I wouldn't have been able to apply for that if I was external, because you had to have a university degree. But if you were an internal candidate, you could apply. It was one of the perks of being an employee. You could apply, and if you pass all of the tests, you got to go on this, what they call the fast track program. And it meant for 2 years, they pushed you all around the building, and you worked in lots of different departments. And by the end, if you qualified, then you would be officially Her Majesty's Inspector of Taxes. So I had this weird claim to fame that I was the youngest. I think I was the youngest ever inspector of taxes, but purely just because I didn't go to university, because everybody else was coming in here. So of course I smugly was like, yeah, it's because I'm so clever and amazing. No, I was just there like 4 years before everybody else.
That's hilarious.
but it made for some weird interviews when I'm going in to interview like a stockbroker in London, and I'm turning up and they're like where's your parents? Like, are you on like some sort of work experience? I'm like, no, it's me. I'm the tax inspector. So
I'm curious, what were some, and I know you can't go into details of the cases, but back then, what were like the big tax cases, evasion, deterrence? What were some of the cases that the tax inspectors were really focusing on back then?
It was, for me in particular, things really changed. I was a traditional tax inspector, just doing the good old fashioned sort of, I don't want to say boring cases, but they were the straightforward, mundane sort of, tax evasion cases. But then an opportunity came up to join a criminal taxes unit. And the pitch that I was given by my old boss was have you heard of like the Al Capone, effect? And we're going to go after the worst criminals in the UK, and we're going to use tax offences to bring them to justice. Everything from terrorists to child exploitation, sort of CSAM cases, through to international money laundering organisations, through racketeering. It doesn't matter. Anything is on the table if we can catch them for tax evasion. And I'm like in my early 20s going, this sounds amazing. I'm going to go to prisons. I'm going to you get a proper warrant card and everything. And even some of my colleagues had like full scale, pseudonyms and fake identity issued because they were doing really sensitive cases. It was just a phenomenal mission driven type of job. So everything from like the famous football managers, people in the UK will know of cases of many sort of famous sports stars that have been investigated for tax evasion, through to really important cases, things like the 7/7 bombings, the terrorist attacks in London. I mean, the financiers connected to those cases, into really sensitive national security cases, things like people involved, and it's in the public domain, people involved in weapons of mass destruction, proliferation. I mean, there's always a London nexus or just because it's such a financial center. So there was always a company or corporate connection. So it just meant for like 3-4 years, it really is where my asset recovery sort of bug started, that I got to be involved in these just remarkable cases. And one of the most famous cases, there's now a Netflix documentary or a dramatization, was a dentist in Northern Ireland who killed 2 people and handed himself in 20 years later. Because he believed from a religious perspective that his son who died, it was the sins of the father coming back on the firstborn son. But what made the case even more chilling was that he was having an affair, and the lady he was having the affair with, they basically killed their respective partners, made it look like joint suicides. This is all going very dark. Made it look like joint suicides, but he was a serving police officer, the guy he killed. And so you had this family ripped apart for 20 years, thinking that these 2 perfectly innocent victims of a murder were actually, these lovers who tried to run off and couldn't run off, and they staged a whole suicide. But because the troubles were going on in Northern Ireland, it probably wasn't given the attention it would have normally been given.
Right.
Looked like a suicide, wrapped it up as a suicide. But that case made a little bit of legal history in Northern Ireland, because by going after that guy, he hands himself into a police station 20 years later, lots of complicated financial affairs. And it also turned out he fell for one of the scams. We can find gold if you only give us some money. He genuinely invested like $250,000 in a finding the hidden World War II Japanese gold. Like nonsense, absolute made up nonsense. But he cooked the books in the dentist practice that he worked. And because of that, we were able to freeze his assets, get this corporate freezing order. Again, it was me getting into more of the asset recovery nitty gritty. Well, the whole team, we all got like a director's award, the commendation. But what I got to then witness was international requests to seize assets.
Right.
They take a long time. Everybody's like, sometimes they just take 2 to 3 years. Like,
the 4-letter word that nobody wants to talk about is MLAT.
MLATs. And it was like, we got MLATs. And then it's like, oh, well, we can't do this. We can't enforce this thing. We can freeze this thing, but we can't do this thing. And I started to see just some of the procedural, and that's what really got me sort of that sort of bug. And then I spent then the next couple of years working in insolvency, and then that led me into the physical seized assets world that we'll talk about, and that got me to here. But that criminal tax job for me really opened my eyes. Even the big word that Amanda Wick and everyone talks about a lot today, civil forfeiture. I mean, that was a civil forfeiture case. So I was in a civil forfeiture team. I was in a criminal investigation team, but we used civil powers because the burden of proof. And a very typical case would be someone found caught with lots of drugs and lots of wealth. And drugs, of course, they're not mine, officer. It's like, okay, we can't get the drugs offense, but we can ask you how you paid for the house. And they can't prove how they paid for the house. Big tax bill, seize the property, seize the assets. So net, you're still disrupting the criminality.
Exactly.
So
that's what
what
drives
kicked
a lot
things
of the
off.
criminality is the money, right? So
That's
at the end of the day,
no one does it unless it's politically motivated or romance motivated. It's called economic crime for a reason.
And I'm curious, you've talked about a little bit about, then going into working into auctions and seizures. Give us that one case. What's the one story that you tell, when you're a couple pints in at the pub and you're like, hey, you wouldn't believe what we seized and how we seized it. I've heard a couple, but I'd love to know what's your go-to story about seizing assets.
There's obviously there was the famous we're seizing Bitcoin. And I was like, what's Bitcoin? But that's actually not as interesting. For me, it was just the sheer variety of assets. I mean, we had a criminal. I was due to board a flight. My flight was cancelled. It was one of the famous storms in England. We don't get many storms. And there was a storm, and then I got a phone call from a police officer. At this point, I'm like, so the important context is the UK does not have a US Marshal style function or an asset management dedicated function like many countries have. There's no central office. So all the governments and all the law enforcement agencies, they have to manage their own seizures. So they bring in the company that I used to work for because private companies manage this. And traditionally, it's actually auction companies. Because when you think about it, auction companies have storage facilities, valuation facilities, inventory facilities, insurance, and the ability to sell assets. And an auction transaction is protected in law. So there's a lot of things that they can do that can't be done privately selling an asset. So for lots of reasons, it's the perfect vehicle sort of for a partner for sort of proceeds of crime seizures. So I was in a company that had the contracts for most of the government agencies in the UK. So I get the phone call saying, hey, we've got a bunch of assets to seize. It's a bit of a weird one. We've got this guy who is buying lots of things on eBay. And when they went out to have a look at his source of funds and his wealth, basically, you've a guy that is appearing in the news every other week voluntarily with his man buys large Star Wars statue, girlfriend goes crazy. Those types of stories. He has this Ripley's Believe It or Not garden where he has the Starsky and Hutch car. He has capuchin monkeys. He has Terminator and Iron Man statues 6 foot tall. He has Star Wars you name it. It was like a movie memorabilia Hall of Fame. The actual hover car from Back to the Future 2. Just so many screen used props. But the crazy thing about it was some police officer just goes, where's he getting all this money from? I mean, he says that he spent $500,000 or pounds on eBay. So the officer digs into this case, and it turns out that no declared income of any real means. So they go and look at the guy. And then again, the story gets worse, where he had basically leased an underground disused nuclear bunker. He was going to use it as a homage to sort of Breaking Bad and make it into a comic book store. And he had all these ideas. And then someone truly Breaking Bad style said, you've got electricity and a big thing. Can I just use that? And they turned it into one of the largest underground cannabis factories ever discovered in the UK, inside a disused World War II nuclear bomb shelter type. This crazy sort of connection. So he was getting paid bags of cash to turn a blind eye, spending his bags of cash on sci-fi memorabilia. And because our contract was all assets, we had monkeys, wallabies, we had to deal with the authorities because they didn't have the right papers for the animals. Getting those animals rehoused is not an easy thing to do. Then you're trying to sell screen-used assets, and to keep the value of the asset, you've got to go to Warner Brothers and Paramount and try and get documentation to verify it. But all the while, it makes you realize how difficult of a job the police have, because this is just a police officer turning up on a seizure warrant. And it's like, hey, I can seize anything of value. And I remember someone sitting there going, is this 14-foot Sigourney Weaver inside an alien thing? How much is that worth?
How much is that worth?
There's no drop-down menu to pick when you're doing that sort of seizure. So, but the officers would be criticized if they left behind assets of value. And if those assets got destroyed or deteriorated. And so that was one, and that always links me into my favorite asset recovery story of all time, which is the Pablo Escobar hippo story. I've never done a case of that scale, but there's now an ecological disaster in Colombia where you have these rampaging over 1,000 hippos that are just destroying local wildlife, indigenous populations, like attacking people. And they're an asset seizure case because there was 2 hippos not recovered when they stormed Escobar's mansion and seized all of his assets, and not knowing what to do because he had an exotic petting zoo. They let the hippos go. And anyone can Google it now. Google Escobar's hippos. It's a proper problem, but it's an anecdote we often tell because it just shows us, like, how do you plan for that in an asset seizure? How do you deal with that? And when we say we seize everything, we truly do seize and sell everything. So we help law enforcement, everything from hippos to NFTs and everything in between. But yeah, crypto's easier, trust me.
And it's, so important that you have to seize anything because, like, just like if you're not seizing the hardware wallets and the seed phrase, what can happen in crypto? But I want to talk about your entrepreneurial journey because you're a non-technical person building a SaaS product at Asset Reality, but you got accepted to Techstars and built a juggernaut of a tech platform. Were you always kind of entrepreneurial, but maybe not technical? And is there anything that you've learned now from being VC backed that you're like, okay, raising funds, building a big business, a lot of hands, a lot of obviously suggestions and recommendations and great guidance. Give us, that entrepreneurial background that you've now experienced, bringing Asset Reality to where it is.
I would never think of myself as entrepreneurial in the sense of, I think I was an accidental salesman, BD person because of my background. I mean, my background in my corporate background, in places like HMRC, my job was to achieve negotiated tax settlements. We didn't want to go to court. We wanted to get the payment, agree to it, give us the money, like give us the check in the meeting. Like I wanted the guy with the offshore bank to be like, hey, you got me, I'll write a check. Like that's what we were targeted on, was getting those cases closed effectively. So I think a lot of time in a lot of prisons, and we literally went to prison. The person's just been locked up for 10 years. Their assets still have to be sold. We still have to physically sit with them and be like, sell the bloody house. Like, give me your consent to sell the house. Don't let it sit for 7 years. It's going to go to ruin. And so I think accidentally I became just experienced in sort of negotiating and just talking to people and communicating with people in usually very difficult circumstances. And it forces a lot of sort of perspective. But I think that, so I wouldn't say entrepreneurial, but I also became really frustratingly impatient when I seen things that didn't work. And it was during my time at the auction company where it was like, there's better ways governments could do this. I mean, you've got, just in the UK, small microcosm, 43 individual forces who are all contributing and seizing assets and all running their own individual systems. And there's no standardization. Against the backdrop, I'd met this company called Chainalysis because myself and Nick Furno had been involved in one of the first crypto seizures in the UK because of this all asset contract that I had. And I got to meet companies like Chainalysis. I got to meet these really interesting technology companies. And I remember reaching out to Jonathan Levin on LinkedIn, and he connected me with a guy, Duncan Hoffman, who's now at Kiln, and saying, hey, look, you guys are like the metal detectors. I mean, you're finding and helping governments find crypto. And then when they find it, they call me and they call my team to say, hey, can you help us with the seizure? Like, we should maybe join this up and start to have a look at it. And that's when I started to just look at tech companies and tech solutions and go, the problem they have is actually managing this inventory. Could we maybe build an inventory? And I couldn't do that without stepping away from the job that I really enjoyed and really loved doing. But I had to make a decision. Was I going to stay in that business doing that thing with a really good team? But it was a case of, or should I maybe start to think about asset recovery as a sector? And then I literally had this little, I call it or someone much more clever than me called it an alliterative adventure. In November 2019, I did 4 Bs. I did Bosnia, Bucharest, Brisbane, and Brussels. 4 weeks back to back, 4 very different conferences, 4 very different events, 4 very different things. Pretty much the same slide deck, pretty much the same problems, pretty much the same answers to the problems. There needs to be a centralized system for seized assets. And I went to 3 different continents, and I kept thinking someone's going to produce a Celebrate style tool, a Chainalysis style tool. It was like, we've come so far, we've almost leaped over seized assets. We've now got to a position where we can do blockchain analytics, but when you find it, you have to use a spreadsheet and an actual paper book. So I have
a legit spreadsheet. As someone that worked for an exchange, they're using legit spreadsheets to keep track of these digital assets.
And I've seen other jurisdictions, and they still have to record it in a book. I've seen people, and do you think, again, anyone who's ever been involved in search and seizure will know this. I mean, you literally you're standing on scene. Most officers aren't like propping a laptop on their knee when they're in someone's house. They are writing it in an exhibit log. So then you started to think about, okay, so it's paper, the siloed database. And so then seeing what companies like Chainalysis and others were doing, and I reached out to the guys, they said, well, if you've got an idea for a business, like, wouldn't it be great? And on my way flying back from the last leg, which was Brisbane, actually, flying back at like 19 hours it takes to get from here to Brisbane. I wonder, could we set up a platform and what would it look like? And I was engaged at this point with the UNODC to carry out reviews of a number of Southern African countries who were wanting to understand they wanted a feasibility study for new IT systems to manage seized assets. And because at this point I had a fair bit of experience in different categories of assets, I was sort of on the circuit talking at a lot of UNODC and FATF events and things like that. And everywhere just kept saying, someone needs to build a tool. Someone needs to build a tool. So when I saw the Chainalysis went through Techstars, the guys, I reached out to Techstars London, the team, and I was like, oh yeah, we have a cohort starting in a couple of months. Like, what's the idea? What's the pitch? And I was like, ooh, well, someone needs to build this thing. I know what it needs to do and I can draw it on a whiteboard, but I have no idea what I'm doing in terms of technology. And like, okay, you need to get some technical co-founders, or you need to start building out that team, but come to Techstars and we'll sort of help you do it. And through that, sort of Nick Ferner was involved sort of very early on. Hugo Elliott, my original co-founder, now the three of us sort of sat down and went, and Hugo comes from a finance background as well, going, we'll need to really get into this, but we know that governments would be happy with anything just to get off and running. It's like even just an awareness of the problem and a roadmap to start helping them. And that's how we started to identify people like Hugo Hoyland, who was one of the original blockchain investigator sort of OGs globally. I mean, he was the person trialing the tools from Chainalysis and Elliptic when they first launched the tools. He built the investigation practice at Crawl. So, and Hugo was actually one of Asset Reality's early clients because, again, he's seizing assets and asking me and Nick to help with custody. So I was like, we want you to come and join as well. And we sort of had this early idea. If we bring together people who know all the component parts, we could do that. And yeah, we applied to Techstars and they were like, we've never had like an eBay of seized assets. With how they were thinking about long term. It's like, if we help governments capture the assets, manage the assets, wouldn't it be amazing if you could sell all the assets in one place? eBay, Amazon style.
That. Yeah, the eBay style makes a lot more sense now. It's just a whole bunch of different jurisdictions, different agencies, but you have everything under control and in one platform.
So that's the original idea, and that's still the long-term roadmap. But how we solve asset recovery at scale? How do you get the assets onto a platform? You need to start with the initial collection. Best thing you can do that is have an app and start collecting the data at source. So that's why we've launched our platform, to make it easier to seize crypto assets, seize boats, use the app, get them on the platform. And then the idea is you have a data set then, and we have over 250 now users across 20 different countries uploading their assets. And you start to get a bit of a picture, and now you can start to work with them and say, right, you need to sell that house in 3 years' time. Let's get an agent appointed, and maybe in a couple of years' time we're Uber style with different subcontractors and agents. But right now we're doing a lot of R&D around what can be sold. There's different legislation in certain countries. They've got like some countries you still have to advertise in the local newspaper. It says that in the legislation. And I think that's the big thing that this industry misses out. When people talk about seized assets, I often hear government agencies being yelled at by the private sector going, why are you not staking all your crypto? Because of the 1978 proceeds of crime legislation means it's a piece of evidence right now, or it's a money laundering exhibit. I can't take your Rolex, sell your Rolex, invest the money, and then if you're not guilty, go, don't worry, I'll buy you another Rolex. Like, that's what happens when you stake assets, for example, in certain cases.
Yeah, so the victims or the criminals still have like some kind of access to these things until these assets
are frozen. These assets are frozen. The title still remains with the person. So I think that's what gives us one of our main USPs is an awareness of asset forfeiture and how that actually works in that interaction with that. But for us, it's just another seized asset. Doesn't matter if it's cars or crypto. They all have nuances. They all have complexities behind them. But that was always the entrepreneurial journey, was to get into Techstars, get connected with really good people, get a really good network of early investors. And then what really helped us was the fact we were solving like just a really important societal problem. It wasn't and no disrespect to anybody intended, but it wasn't sort of gym membership comparison website. It wasn't there's lots of really cool companies that are billion-dollar companies, but I think the mission-driven side of this is like, we pay more tax, we are more at risk. We could have better policing, better laws, better safety and security and just economic prosperity for the country if we get this right. And the infamous statistic, 1% of assets are recovered globally. Like every investor we met was like, surely not. But it sounds preposterous. Like what if for all crimes committed, we only arrested 1% of people? Or we only jailed 1% of criminals?
Well, I feel like a lot of people think that's where we are right now with crime in the North America. But, and what, like just you saying that, it's easy if you seize a car in Argentina and only have to deal with the local victim, the local criminal, the local, police department. But cross-border digital asset payments involve, because the agency that might be looking to seize the funds are in a different jurisdiction than where the funds might have ended up or the exchange it might have ended up at. And the criminal's in another jurisdiction. So you have to apply so much different legislation, regulatory requirements, as you said, information sharing and MLATs. That's almost impossible to do for law enforcement if they don't have a technology tool to streamline this.
Yeah, and that was one of the reasons why we have to have such a diverse set of backgrounds in the team. Outside of traditional sort of like product and engineering and building, we have this weird bolt-on that now all of a sudden we're building in a heavily regulated, to be regulated, not too sure in certain jurisdictions, space with crypto assets, interactions. So all of a sudden now we have, and I think we've done it right. I think we do deserve credit that we haven't built fast and loose like a lot of exchanges have. A lot of exchanges, built multi-billion-dollar companies. We could have been open. We could have made a lot of money being open for business day one to retail customers, and just saying, "Hey, we built the same infrastructure as an exchange. We're just an exchange for government agencies and asset recovery practitioners." But we didn't. We chose. I think at one point we probably had more MLROs and regulatory infrastructure than some of the billion-dollar exchanges do. And that's why we were with pride that we manage the most sensitive assets in the world. We don't have any regulatory breaches. We haven't been fined. Touch wood. We haven't been fined. Our CEO hasn't been arrested yet. People have short memories of some of the exchanges, and it's just not fit for purpose for governments. So that's why, if you had a auction company or an estate agency that their CEO was arrested, their company had money laundering breaches, they were under regulatory scrutiny and fined by the regulator, the local cops wouldn't come along and go, "Hey, can you sell this house?" Right. And I think a lot of exchanges, some exchanges have done an extraordinary job and done a great job and built law enforcement liaison teams and done a really good thing. But also, we're ex-law enforcement elephants. We never forget. We've also been on the other side of this where 3-4 years ago, we couldn't get any information out of some of these places. And now all of a sudden it's like, no, they're the best companies in the world.
I'm curious though, when you talk about that, like FTX, Einstein, Quadriga CX, what happens if law enforcement has seized assets and they're using these exchanges as custodians? What happens to law enforcement seized assets? Do they evaporate? Are they standing in line with other investors that have...
100%. And this is the big thing. And I think this was one of the reasons that drove us to, I was talking about having that diverse background. We have people like Danny Haston, who's an ex-asset recovery lawyer. We have people like TJ, who's was the U.S. Marshals Asset Forfeiture Unit and has been in charge of managing huge billion-dollar portfolios of complicated assets internationally. We had to have this really broad bench of backgrounds on top of our compliance infrastructure and on top, because to understand that, because you're right that we've seen this, and I think this is why people use us. This is why we work with some of the sort of largest agencies in the world, because there is that risk if they go to a regular retail or consumer business, they're not going to be top of the queue if there's a problem. They're not doing $1 trillion every sort of 2-3 years in trade with these people. They're not the big important. They're a small team and a small unit, probably very good, very committed men and women, but they're still a small piece of the giant puzzle. And we've seen this, and some of our team were involved in the cases that you've just been rhyming off in Canada, back in their old jobs. And if you have the local government agency has their assets with that person, they're gone. They are an unsecured creditor in the bucket with everybody else. And I think that was one of the reasons why very early on, some of the government agencies that first started working with us when we were in our infancy, it was like, we'd rather take our chances with you when we only move assets once or twice, ever. Right. And it's like, if it can get seized and stay in the same place, because the court order will stipulate that, they would rather, we call it sort of fast in, slow out. Being able to seize assets as quickly and expeditiously as possible, but maintaining the chain of custody as much as possible, and then doesn't move. And if it takes 5, 6, 7 years for that case to come to conclusion, there's a chain of custody in place there. And I think that's very valuable and mandatory in some government agencies as well. And I think that's why they like working with us, because they realize that when they pick up the phone to call us, they're not in the queue because there's a bank run on the exchange, because there's been some news and the FTX account now, all of a sudden there's a problem. I think most governments, it would be unfair to me to sort of represent that lots of governments have lots of exchange accounts. That's probably not the case nowadays. There's been enough scares that people went, ooh, the hell with that. Now, a lot of government agencies have pre-existing procurement where they're still working with exchanges on liquidations, for example. It's in the press. I mean, Coinbase was awarded the US Marshals contract. Now, what remains to be seen is that the executive order, we're no longer liquidating forfeited crypto. That's going to go into strategic reserve. So there's just so many interesting things that keep always changing in the space. I think the industry just wanted its own solution built by practitioners for practitioners. And I think that's the gap we occupy.
You mentioned chain of custody. Like, if you're the one in charge of crypto and you're the only one that's knowledgeable about crypto, and all of a sudden that, 3 Bitcoin that you seized 5 years ago is now, worth millions of dollars, and you want to send some of that and there's nobody oversighting and watching what you're doing, or technically even understands what you're doing, you run into a lot of problems. And we've seen it in the news where law enforcement is the one taking these crypto assets because they believe they're the only ones that understand how these assets move. And, without that oversight, without that chain of custody, 5, 6, 7 years later, that's when we're finding out that, hey, this person was skimming crypto off the top and nobody even knew about it.
Well, we've seen this in the industry. I remember back when mining was truly exploding. It was IT managers and buildings were running mining rigs and server rooms and stuff because no one would notice. And crypto's crypto's no different than gold. And if you're the manager of the gold or diamonds and you're in an organization where no one really knows what you're doing and they don't understand what protocol should be in place, like an example would be if I'm involved in a cash seizure. There's very, very clear law enforcement protocols, but not in all jurisdictions. But in most jurisdictions around, there must be a second or third person. There must be body cam footage. It must all be counted at the time of seizure. It must be cross-referenced and verified, and then it'll be lodged. But all of that was born out of lots of mistakes when it was like, oh, we seized a bunch of cash. How much? Count it out. It's been in custody for 3 days now in an open bag in an evidence locker type thing. And then allegations come in and the criminal says, or the suspect says, hey, there was $2,000 or $10,000 more. And that, well, of course he would say that he's a criminal. And then something's like, no, there was actual evidence. He withdrew it in the bank and he was arrested 3 minutes later. And like, where did the money go? So it will always happen if the controls aren't in place. And that was one of the things we wanted to do from day one, was make it, like, we think of it as sort of democratizing access to asset seizure. Because you're right, it's not feasible for governments anymore to say, call the crypto person at 3 a.m. when they're doing a seizure. So, and we've seen a lot of the blockchain analytic tools do similar things. The launch of a lot of the recent chain and TRM and other tools is around making analytics easier. So just reduce that burden. So just that instant triage. And those things come with risks as well, because you still need to know what you're doing, to interpret the information. But I completely get, quicker decision making is always a good thing. Or quicker access to information is a good thing. So for us, it was a case of make that seizure part easier, but baking in all of the governance and compliance, so that if Stephen goes out to photograph the asset and Stephen sees in the car and the crypto, straight away he's doing something on an app that he's 2-factor authenticated and logged into, that his administrator can see what Stephen's up to. And you can see that even just you knowing that and being aware of that, there's a first layer of control that's in place. And if you then say, hey, I'm retiring, I'm taking a new job somewhere else, I'm off to sunnier pastures, being able to just say, great, we'll just reassign that role. And now Stephen's, replacement's coming in. He's going to be the person that does seizures tomorrow in the force. And he's got the app, the Asset Reality app, and he's doing seizures, for example. Whereas in the past, it was like, oh, shoot, Stephen was a crypto guy. He set up the wallets. He has the seed phrase. What if Stephen's remembered them all or wrote them down somewhere else? And we're going to have to do this all over again. We're going to have to purge everything, transfer it all again. And that's why a lot of agencies, had to create their crypto custody stack 2-3 times, change it. And then they went, oh, the hell with that. Let's just use an exchange somewhere. They use an exchange. Oh, someone's had a bank run, or they've been hacked, or the CEO's been arrested. And and now one person has access to the account. And there was just so many. At the time, it was the only solution available. And I think for us, we just want to try and make it a bit easier, build in the governance layers, build in the transparency. And again, that wouldn't have been possible 6 or 7 years ago. I mean, in the past, there was exchange or hardware software wallet, whereas now you've got things like MPC. And now you can have multiple layers and multiple governance structures and 14 different people if you want 14 people on your signing, but all 14 can go off on vacation for 3 months and you can just put different people in. There's just so much that keeps changing all the time.
And hey, you're in the public sector and all of a sudden now there's a crypto boom. All your talent's going into the private sector. Yeah. Like you need to now reassign roles at probably a rapid pace. You mentioned something though that I think will help a lot of tech, crypto, and other payments founders listening to this podcast and investors. Is you mentioned a lot of great people from a lot of great, different places within the ecosystem. If you're raising 5, 10, 15, $20 million, like the people that you mentioned, that money, and obviously you do have revenue on the other side, that money goes pretty quick. When I see people saying like, hey, $50 million or $10 million, I'm like, yeah, but they have like 5, 6, 700 people. Like that capital goes away very, very quick. Talk to me about how you balance bringing in top talent, managing that with revenue and, the VC dollars. And then, when the VCs give you money, they're expecting certain turnarounds, certain things to happen. Talk to me from like creating a startup. Maybe it's a scale up at this point, but, doing that in an industry that's very volatile, not just from a price perspective, but from a VC interest perspective and from a growth perspective.
It is the $1 million question. And it's always that old thing about, can you bootstrap your startup? You'll get, it's like a side note that I actually wrote down to remind myself to say to you when I was speaking today. One of the most liberating sort of eureka moments that I had probably 6 months ago, a year ago, maybe. One of my colleagues actually has a recording of me saying it at a little all hands meeting we were having. And I used to completely absorb myself in all of the advice. And like, even when you join Techstars, mandatory reading list, Y Combinator is the same. And it's like, right, there's 45,000 podcasts I've got to listen to every single week. Otherwise I'm a moron. I gotta understand all of these. I gotta consume everything Andreessen puts out and A16Z puts out. And you can end up just going absolutely down this rabbit hole of this like shake and bake, pull together, Frankenstein of all the best advice in the world. And surely if you follow that, it'll all be fine. And I remember listening to a podcast, a very successful podcast that I'll not name, that the guy in one episode completely 180'd because someone truly, like, everything he thought about building a sales playbook at a SaaS company. This very successful entrepreneur was like, nope, completely disagree. Here's how I think about it. And the host was like, oh my God, you are right. And then part of me just sort of paused a minute. So hold on a second. Everyone who's listened to your show for the last 3 years has been called morons if they don't do it your way. And your way is now just changed in one conversation. And it made me realize that if I keep hearing this stat, which Techstars and start accelerators are very proud of, they're like 98% of startups fail. Only 2% of those actually go and raise VC money. The very fact you've even just raised a little bit of VC money means you're in a very, very, very small club. And it's like, yeah, that's a good thing. That means you've got someone to believe your story and the vision and the potential to execute, and you've got some money. And it's not a validation. It's just it's a good start. You've got to still build a successful company. But it made me realize that, well, if 98% of all startups fail, is there a chance that 98% of all the advice out there is garbage or it's not relevant? It's like, giving someone advice on love on a website. It's like sometimes all you have is a combination of your collective organizational intuition. So I don't believe in, just follow my gut. What if I'm wrong? But I believe in, I have to ultimately at the end of the day be able to sit down with the VCs or our board and say, here's the decision we made. And that's on me. But the best thing I can do is at least surround myself with intelligent people and challenging people who will at least come to a bit of a consensus and say, have we covered all of the bases? Then it's for me to take that decision, and ultimately it's on my head. But I think that there is this delusion that you can just follow a playbook because you're in a particular industry. And if you're truly, truly, truly like generationally successful, and you look back now at the companies like Airbnb and things like that, I mean, everything, they're great at sort of going back, it's always those companies that like create their own job titles and then everyone else follows. So rather than trying to cookie cutter down, we often try and look and say, Flexport was a good example. OpenGov was a similar one. And I'll look at companies and go, okay, well, what companies have done something in a similar sector to me that playbook may work a little bit? And can we take a fragment of that and put that over here? But with a big giant caveat, it may not work. And not being afraid. And I think if I would look back on things, getting that balance of you can bring in lots of people very quickly. We probably hired too quickly very early on. And I can look at it two different ways and say, but actually hiring a lot of people meant that we were able to acquire a lot of customers. But then the compromise is you're not in the weeds building. But then you know better than anybody, you're building brand and marketing and distribution. Again, back to good old startup advice. Someone over here says distribution beats product. Someone else says no, product beats distribution. I said, well, who's right? Like Peter Thiel, he's a pretty smart guy. So should I follow him or should I follow the other smart guy? And you realize that you can find an answer or a disagreement for every position you take. That's the dangerous thing. And you can go down that rabbit hole each time. So, but I think for us, I think it was CrowdStrike, the CEO, George Kurtz, I think it is. He had a great thing about that resonated with me around just trust, is that if they call you in their greatest moments of need, then you will just organically and almost naturally become a long-term business partner with them. So I was very well aware that our industry was incredibly analog, and a lot of it comes down to relationships. So we need that law enforcement practitioner, former lawyer, someone who's been in the weeds, someone who's worked at the regulator's office, someone that understands compliance. And if we can do that, then those enterprise clients will see that you actually know what you're talking about. Then the rat race is to try and quickly build the product, the technology, and build something scalable in the background, as you say, while at all times balancing hey, we've got to make some money because we've got investors and we can't run out of money, and you can't also perpetually raise money. And we've seen that, like the blockchain analytic boom, 2021 in particular with crypto, money was thrown everywhere, and we sort of missed that. We were just way too early. We only came out of Techstars, 3 people in sort of 2021. But part of me is almost a little bit glad that we missed it, because on one hand, would I love to have $100 million investment? No, who wouldn't want that sort of capital? We've raised less than $20 million. But similarly, I also worry for a lot of 2021 vintage companies going, how on earth are you going to hit those metrics? And you've seen big layoffs in lots of big companies. We always have to look every quarter now. We have to look and go, they're amazing, but like, do we really need 5 days a week? Could we do a day a week? Could we do 2 days a week? And I think that's what I would reteach myself going back. And also it's being probably even more honest with people, especially when, startups are startups. Sometimes you get the perennial people have been in 15 different startups. They're used to it. Then you get people that have never been in a startup in their life. We've got some employees that they're very young, pretty much like their first like proper full-time job. And then we have people that have been in these like stellar careers for 20, 30, 40 years. So I really like that we have a big, broad mix. But yeah, for me, it's always like the advice to give to people is that most of the advice is wrong. And like people dogmatically follow all of this advice. And he said it and she said it. Like at the end of the day, you're the person that will look yourself in the mirror, and you're the person who will sit with the VCs, and you will either be exiting successfully or you will be wrapping up your company. And the advice you didn't listen to won't really matter. It's like for me, have a bias towards just build stuff and get stuff done. And that's now for us, our big push right now. We've just got our FCA registration. We had to cross that first big hurdle, and Mika is next. And yeah, it's an exciting sort of adventure to be on. But I do feel for a lot of I think too many startups try and it's like finding a hammer. What's the saying? I'm trying to find a hammer for my nail. No, I'm trying to find a nail for your hammer. I think sometimes people build something and then try and retrofit it. One of the things I think we're lucky, and it's luck, and that's where I think we're humble about that, is that there is this enormous problem that needs solved. And we have a lot of very mission-driven people who just want to solve the problem because it is actually doing something good, like for humanity. We genuinely like feel that in the company that no one wants bad people to have assets. We want to unapologetically. We want to take assets off bad people.
You've
So I think that's what makes it fun for me anyway. I don't know if the rest of the team may all not agree, but I'm pretty sure they do. All joking aside, we have we've a great bunch of people that just want to do the right thing, and I think that's where we're really lucky as a startup. I'm not trying to convince people here. We're the 24th best company in our sector, and we're truly the first in our space. But then the pressures, we also know that rivals could come up on us very, very quickly and look at what we've done over 3 or 4 years and help that orient and make them move very, very quickly behind us. And that's something we're always sort of looking over our shoulder at.
Do you feel a shift? Maybe not so much advice, but obviously you're talking with other founders and VCs and all these other companies and law firms. Do you feel a shift? Because you were around in 2021. That was right after, during the pandemic. And, it was a very softer DEI. It feels like we're going to like a tech focus, no more DEI initiatives, no more, paternity leaves for unlimited PTOs. We're going very much like Elon Musk. You got to this is our time to work 100 hours in 5 days.
Is it 777 or what's the current thing?
Yeah, it's basically what I call anyone working at Binance. Hey, how do you like a 16-hour shift? You'll have 7 of them this week. Good luck. But do you notice that too? I feel like a lot of the companies are we did the partnerships. There's no more fluff now. It's back to business. We're a tech company. Let's go do tech. And we don't care how you feel. And if you're too woke or you're too initiative driven, you're going to have to go work at another company. Do you feel that? Or maybe...
Yeah. Oh, no. Listen, I see it. I see it massively. And maybe it's from my own background. I mean, I've talked on podcasts before. I was bullied. I was one of the smallest kids in my class in school. That's another reason I left school at 16. I had a pretty hard time with bullies and stuff. And I was from the different area in the posh school, and I was from the rough part of town, and I was in this weird carrying a violin back and forward. And I was like the cliche kid that was going to get picked on for 1,000 different reasons. Growing up. So I think that, but I think that as a company we have really good empathy for each other. We have a lot of team members right now going through some really tough personal stuff, and it sort of galvanizes. And when I think about the examples you're giving, when I do see those shifts, but I think it kind of shows that those companies are a bit soulless, candidly, in the sense of they might be wildly financially successful, but if you're flip-flopping that much anyway, we're not changing what we're doing at Asset Reality. The people we have working in the company work really hard all the time, and not every hire is perfect. That's also be absolutely candid. But that's individuals. I think if you can build a good company culture, which is really, really hard to do, and especially remotely, that for me was the single biggest challenge. I wanted everybody in the office together because I believe that that's where culture matters. That's where you get to have a conversation with people. Right. So I do agree in the being in the office, but I also know that pragmatically, if you've hired a bunch of people in 2022 and offered them remote work, I can't now just go, oh, hey, by the way, dudes in DC, you're sacked now because we're just all going to be in London. I'm never going to do that. But I'm going to say, in our future hires going forward, can we maybe start trying to bring people, because I see the value of people being in a room. And one of the reasons that we're connected so strongly with Amanda Wick, it's on LinkedIn. Amanda's one of our early angel investors. I met Amanda during a time in Chainalysis, and I completely supported what she was doing, because I think woke and DEI for anything that's disingenuous, is dumb, and it's just wrong and is going to backfire. And I think what you've basically seen is the companies that were doing it and didn't really give a damn about it, but it was kind of the popular thing to do. They did it. And now you're just really seeing them for what they are. And it's they're just being exposed now. The same companies and they really infuriate me, the same companies that were all very, very tight-lipped about the big money laundering cases, and they didn't really have an opinion, but now the new administration's in, they can say whatever they want. It's well, so you're just revealing that was your true feelings all along, but you weren't honest about it. For me, it seems disingenuous. So I think for us, and we were actually joking the other day that I think we're slowly being outnumbered, for example, in our senior leadership team, that no shock horror that there's more women than men. It's not by design. It's just that we talk to sensible people, and then good people sort of join the company. So, but I do see a cynical shift towards that, and I do see a cynical, sort of bro culture, slightly popping back up again. But again, I think that I'm like I'm 42 years of age, but I feel 62 in a sense of experience, and I've been in very varied jobs. So I consider myself a bit of an old soul, and I sort of zoom out on it, and I try and like channel my inner, like, chilled out war veteran, just looking, going, these are all cycles.
Right.
Now, a couple of years of this, we'll be talking about something else in another couple of years. What will always be here will be economic crime, will be struggling government agencies trying to seize assets and to go after criminals. So we try and stay back from the current popular trend that is happening, but we will always dig in on what's right. I think what Amanda did and what Ava did needed to be done. And that's why we were one of the first members. I think that bastard, I think Ari beat me to being the first male ally.
Of course he is.
Of course he's everywhere. He's
such a good soul that of course he did.
How dare
you?
It's sickening how nice he is.
All the rest of us are like, hey, we're men. We can't do anything. We can't join. And Ari's probably the first one to be like, hey, I'd love to join. And she'd say, oh, of course. But I think actually that male allyship really changed the way AWIC, performed, because it wasn't performative. It was like, hey, we all got to work together. Yeah. And here's a path for males to get involved versus us just sitting as women talking about how bad men were. And I think that was a lot of the conversations. I was at a lot of the International Women's Day conversations. I was like, wow, like you're not going to get many places just focusing on what like the problem or who the problem is. I think Amanda's done a great job of focusing on the solutions and small wins. Hey, can we get a woman on this panel? Can we get conferences thinking about why women should be on this panel?
You say they're small. I think they have like seismic implications in the sense of, because I get to see it in practice. I mean, I've done it. I now, just without even thinking now, when I'm invited to speak at a panel, I immediately go in, and it is in my mind, and I'm looking, going, it's 6 middle-aged white males in this, and it's going, no, but what I will say is the reason the company's called Asset Reality is because I have a quote about being a realist, and I've had it on my iPad for like 10 years. Is I also am a realist. There's a chance that those 6 people are the absolute 6 best people for the job. And I've said this, I wouldn't apologize if I had 6 people of the same race, if all things were equal, if there was a genuine meritocracy. And I think that is difficult. And then everyone does have a bit of a responsibility just on sheer optics as well. Right. But I also said that I refuse, I hate, this is a terrible soundbite, I hate women in blockchain panels. I think it's the most degrading thing to do to somebody. When you're sitting at an event, and that for me is organizer ticking box. It's like, well, I was on a panel session recently, and I'm doing my usual thing. We're talking about sanctions and seized assets and that. And then I don't want to name the event or call it the person who was the victim of this. One of the best crypto minds in the world is on the women in blockchain panel with the other 3 women in blockchain. I'm like, why not just have them on a panel talking about the thing they're good at? And I was like, no, it was like ladies' corner in the corner, like Women's Institute event. And so I still think there's a long way to go. I think that there's no doubt it steps in the right direction, but I think we also need to kind of call that stuff out and going, can we all just agree? We'll make it accessible for everybody. We'll promote from within. We'll give people opportunities, people that don't get natural opportunities. Let's make sure we over leverage to getting them in. But similarly, I'm not going to hire someone who's, who ticks the box.
Right. But
the better candidate is the guy or the girl in that situation. So I think trying to get to that is tricky. But then, I think credit to Amanda for what she's done with that. And like I say, we were having a running joke looking at our org chart the other day. I think it was Danny Haston or someone highlighted going, "You're massively outnumbered." It's like we just hired the right people. It just happens organically.
But I don't think anyone's like, hey, he's really trying to do diversity. It's like, oh, he just have the best people in the industry. And I think people, from someone that creates content and talks to a lot of companies and asks them for inspiration, they're like, we want that branding. We want that kind of personnel. We want that kind of vibe that Asset Reality has. And that's what, one day I think I even made a video. I was like going through Asset Reality on the LinkedIn and all the people that work there. I'm like, hold on, they have this person and this person and this person just came over. I was like, wow, is anyone noticing how many superstars they have?
Do you know that's the big thing for me around and that's very kind of you to say. I think that for us, that's the big validation, and I take no credit for that. Like, good people are joining our team because of the rest of the team. I mean, when you look at, I'm not a blockchain expert, I'm not a digital asset expert, that's none of my background. So when I see people wanting to join us, that's for me is always that validation. Trish Turner is a great example. I mean, Trish and I talk. They're actually. At some point, I'm happy to say it on this podcast. It's a bit more informal. I will surface a photograph of a karaoke event in DC many years ago.
You're infamous. Everyone that mentions Aidan mentions an infamous
it gets
karaoke
better.
story.
It gets better. It's for me, it is BD of the gods. You see people's soul when you see like their song choices and karaoke and stuff. I stand by it. That's my next startup. I'm going to have a karaoke van that drives around at corporate events. I have a photograph, and there's like 7 people in karaoke like 3-4 years ago, and like I think of the 7 people, 6 either work at Asset Reality or are investors. And at the time, none of them were. And it's true just about like personal connections. And Nick Trish was a great example of just Trish saying, hey, I'm leaving IRS. I'm going to be involved with CTG. I'm going to be doing tax computations and putting her sort of brilliant mind to work. But I'd love to work with you guys because I like the mission. It was not about me. It was like, I like the mission, and you have a bunch of like decent people at the company. I was like, yeah, let's do something. Let's make it work. And that's a continuing theme for us. We're really, really lucky that good people want to come and work at Asset Reality. And that for me is all, and that's really important. You mentioned earlier about investors. I mean, what are the signals you can give to investors that your company, can, like, I always think of a CEO founder's job is, the sort of people and story are 2 of the sort of main things. And if you can attract the right people and keep that going, I mean, because there's absolutely no point raising $1 billion in venture capital money if no one wants to work with you. So I would love to say it's because of my technical expertise, but I think it's probably the combination of karaoke and hiring good people for them to go and work with. I just sort of pass them on and say, hey, you're joining that team, and you've got a lucky bunch of people around you.
I'm curious. I can ask you this because you're, a straight shooter. Have you ever felt like, hey, maybe to get to that next level, I'm not the CEO that's going to do it? Or maybe 100%. Conversation with VCs. I'm sure they have a CEO, and obviously they have the same, charisma as you do, but we might need someone more technical or someone that has this label or this association. Has that ever crossed your mind? How do you deal with that? Because I think a lot of people that have built companies from the ground up kind of go to that, and then, as you said, they're listening to podcasts and say, when you reach 5 years, you should be stepping down and bringing somebody else in.
This is something that I've sort of battled with, this sort of imposter syndrome, especially when I'm like listening to some of the conversations of some of our team, and you just realize just how technical they are, and the stuff they're talking about is like, I add 0 value to that conversation. Like I know my limit. But I also know that I think anyone who's in that CEO position has to look and consider and say, right, who has the most context for the best generalist decision making? I do truly believe that I'm in a very fortunate position in terms of my actual interest and passion in asset recovery. Means that if there comes a point where we have 4 senior executives in the company all pitching for, hey, we're going to change this in our product roadmap, we're going to do this thing, we're going to do this, I feel that I'm in the best position to take those nuggets and say, I think this is how we go forward, and this is why. Because I have that 10,000 foot view, and I have that sort of like North Star on the mission piece. But I've said since day one, the minute we realize as an organization, I've never managed more than 50 people, let alone more than 100 people, let alone more than 150 people, let alone 200. So I fully see myself being that person saying, so if I'm better in the business at actually sitting down on the strategy side, whether you call it strategy, whether you call it vision, I think a lot of CEOs need to have that, like, just self-awareness. Like, for me, that's my Tim Ferriss podcast question. What one message would you give to the world, like a billboard? Self-awareness. Just be self-aware. Like, nearly all the world's problems go away if everyone's self-aware. And I think I'm self-aware to know I have no experience of that, but it might be that at the stage we're at and the way we're growing, because of a lot of our decisions, and I love the fact that we've seen this like scaling back of managers for managers' sake. A lot of it's AI driven, but I think candidly it should have been done pre-AI. There's so many, I think Airbnb did a very good job at this, is going like, just having managers for managers' sake is sometimes necessary, but other times it stifles a company. So for me, I'm trying to hold on as long as they'll let me to be that, because I think you still need that enthusiasm, dragging the company forward. And I say dragging in the sense of like chief cheerleader, dragging when I want other people to be able to be like, this all seems really tough, and saying, we're not going to solve this technical problem, or, oh my God, we want to go and hire these 25 engineers, but we need to raise more money to do that. And like, it is literally my job to be like, it's going to be good. We're going to sort this. So I think that If you're a random CEO who's just come in because you've worked at a couple of big, insert names of big companies, I don't know if I would be enthused if I was a engineer or somebody else. I'm like, I want to know that you are literally going to sleep thinking about this problem, that you're waking up thinking about this problem, you're standing in Starbucks thinking about the problem. So I think I've seen some really good companies bring in the corporate manager or president way too early, and it kills the company. And I think a lot of that vintage 2021 fundraising, because of course, if a VC gives you $80 million or $100 million and they say you're changing the CEO, you're changing the CEO.
You're changing the CEO, especially if you want to raise another round with them.
Precisely. You're not. so that's why for us, that balance was always, if I meet somebody who I feel has a better passion for what we're trying to do about asset recovery, I'll step aside immediately and say, right, how do I help you? How do I enable? If the mission is the main thing, and I think that time will come at some point, there will be someone who's much better placed, but part of me is almost interested. And again, I take a lot from Brian Chesky about, but how much can I learn on the job as well? And maybe I'll be the person and be the right person at the right place. But I do think it is a question that everyone has to keep asking themselves all the time, because there's nothing worse than that person who hangs on and then a really good company with a really good mission just dies because they didn't see it. And I think there is that, too many companies get sort of stuck in the mud. I think if you are a fast growing startup company, you need to be moving fast and orienting and iterating fast. Whereas too many are like, we're doing this thing, we're going to stick with this thing for 6 to 9 months. Like the combination of crypto and startup is like advanced dog years. It's like that episode. It's like the Interstellar movie. 1 minute in our world is three days in your world.
You step off and you're all old and gray, and they're like, "How long was I out?"
How long has it been?
Like 18 years. And you're like, "No," you're just like sitting there crying.
It's true. It's like I haven't spoken to another human in 80 years. It's like we can't afford to sit around and be like, "Oh, well, we'll revisit this next week." And it's like, you just simply can't. It has to be. And I think that's where I'll come into a lot of criticism. I have no doubt I'll look back and I've made a ton of decisions wrong. But again, my favorite bit of startup advice was always like the storming the beaches analogy. There is a time when you're storming the beach and the only objective is to storm the beach. It's not a time to count your ammunition. It's not a time to make sure you pack the lunch or you've lost the boot. It's like, that's not the time. But I think some people stay in storming the beaches mode for too long, when actually, you've raised the big round, you've got 18 months runway, maybe time to sit back and take a bit of a look across the landscape and go, do we have all the right people? Are they the right personalities? Are we getting, or do we have the right people in the right roles? I think that's a constant. And then fall in love with the problem, not the solution. The book by the Waze founder, Waze, as everyone else would say, my Northern Irish accent. He always talks about, do the list. Every couple of months. And we always say to our whole team, here's the book we're reading, please go read this book. So there's no big secret. I'm not trying to keep like advice in my head. I'm like, if you want to know what I'm thinking about, this is what I'm reading right now, or what I'm listening to on a podcast, or what I'm listening to on Audible. And he does that exercise of like sitting down every couple of months, entire org chart. If you're starting over again tomorrow, anyone that's not in the bucket that you wouldn't personally ask to come and join you in the company, it's like, have a conversation for their sake as well. Like, and be like, I think you might be better in a different company. And we've been really lucky. For us, the difficulty we have when people leave the company is that you are growing so fast that the person, it's like Moneyball, get on first base type of thing, is like the person that you maybe need for 0 to 24 months. It's a different skill set from 24 to 48. And we're not always going to get that decision right. But I think we try and be candid as a company to basically be like, I often use the on the bus, off the bus sort of speech, going like, this is the way we're going to do it over the next 6 to 9 months. If you are not like screamingly enthusiastic to do this, like, please let's have a private conversation and we'll figure something out. And some people, obviously I would respect their privacy, have taken me up on that. And I infinitely respect them for saying, it's maybe not for me. It's maybe not the thing that I'm aligned with right now. Maybe I've got family commitments I'd rather do. Maybe I'd rather work on a different project. Maybe I'd rather go completely somewhere in a different direction. That's brilliant for everybody. And I think a lot of founders are probably not comfortable. They're not easy conversations. I still get nervous having those types of conversations. But I think, again, years of sitting in prison waiting rooms, talking to people, I always keep reminding myself, going, it can't be worse than that other time the guy tried to put me out the window type time. Like it's not going to be like that. Yeah. I have a good reference point.
And I think you brought up a couple of good points. It's like, hey, the same things are going on in your head when you're sitting around with a bunch of technical people talking about things you don't know. There's other people in your organization that probably feel the same way, right? They're former law enforcement or former regulator, and they understand what needs to be done. But then that technical that technical bound keeps on raising and raising, and it's hard to keep up with that. Someone that sat at exchanges wondering, what am I doing here? Because that person knows way more about cryptography and cryptocurrency. And then you mentioned Storm. I think everyone's watched Private Ryan, Saving Private Ryan. If Tom Hanks doesn't pick up people and keep charging when the bullets are flying over their head, they won't. There's no more, trying to secure the beach. It's like, hey, we have to get to that next point.
And he was famously a school teacher.
Yeah,
but it's like he's
the CEOs that might come in might, like, when the bullets start flying, are they worried more about saving themselves and making sure their pocketbook is okay, making sure they have an exit plan, or are they leading the rest of the team, to get that bunker and take out that big weapon? Last points. I know I've kept you so long. I could probably talk to you for another hour and a half. But this is not like it's like some of the podcasts that we listen to for 3 hours.
Yeah, long
any exciting
form,
announcements? I know you mentioned Trish, who you just brought on the team. Is there any exciting announcements? We still have 4 months left. It feels like this is going to be probably one of the biggest 4 months in crypto, especially in compliance. There's a lot of, moons aligning, momentum from the US and the UK and abroad. What are your thoughts going into the end of this year?
I think that now that we have a lot of regulatory clarity, I think the gloves will be off in terms of crypto-related enforcement. At a macro level, what's really exciting for us is that our whole investment was around like the FATF effect. FATF recommendation 15 sort of gave birth to a blockchain analytic industry. It made it compulsory that companies and government agencies, to an extent, had to have analytic tools. And that's sort of happening in our world now, and that's what we're really excited about. There is a mandatory, you must have a central register of seized assets. And we built the first one in the world. But I know that with that will bring a lot of competition as well, which is healthy. But I obviously want as much time as we can get. But I think that within that, you now are going to see at the end of the year, particularly in the US, with budgets coming online as well, probably a massive flurry of activity. We're seeing lots of cross collaboration in the sector. We're seeing lots of the announcements from exchanges and analytic companies, freezing funds. I think what we're hoping is that there will be more clarity. I just don't think, I think people lose sight of crypto as this borderless, regulatory hot mess. How can you're trying to be an international, if I put myself in the shoes of an exchange or one of your sort of typical listeners from compliance perspective, I can see how difficult it is. Like, we sit on the law enforcement side, we don't have retail customers, consumer customers, we help governments, but I can imagine what it must be like. And I have a lot of friends who are compliance officers in big exchanges. And it's like, how do you do it? Like, how do you go from one meeting with the EU, there's a very particular stance on crypto, that the UK is, pitching itself as being a bit more progressive, to now the current administration in the US being like, have at it. Even if you launder money, you're fine. Like, it's fine. Don't need to be an MSP. We got you. It's like, there's just this spread. How do you build a business around that? And I think, and then you've got AI is going to solve everything. No, spoiler alert, it's absolutely not. If anything, it's going to make things a hell of a lot harder, because you're just going to have more program. Aaron West will tell you better than I will on that. But so I think that there will be I think what will drive everything is the capital that's going to come in. There's going to be a lot of capital that comes in. And a lot of the VCs in this sector, obviously, are also usually, very large crypto holders themselves or adjacently to their sort of connected wealth. So, an interesting side note, our lead investor, Framework Ventures, is a very big crypto DeFi fund. We're like the weirdest portfolio company they have. I think they're one of the biggest holders of Chainlink outside of the Chainlink team. And they're deep sort of DeFi crypto folks. And then they've got us on the side. But it's like, there will always, but it's like,
you're the last one to get invited to the portfolio dinners.
People like, you guys come in later. What do you guys do? And we're like the global undertakers. Like, there's always going to be problems in the sector. There's always going to be someone who needs to do that. But I think it makes it very exciting for the sector, with the regulatory clarity, with the defense tech and gov tech things coming online. So I think we could be entering into sort of another big sort of boom period, is what it certainly looks like. And particularly back to the 2019 FATF. Now that FATF have announced that asset recovery will be this key priority, the new FATF guidance that's coming out mentions asset management and seized assets 148 times, for example. That's good for asset recovery in general. And asset recovery then means that has a knock-on effect in compliance, in blockchain analytics. So I would say that my advice to anybody would be to brush up on old school asset recovery, because ultimately that's what underpins all of this. Why do we have compliance screening? To spot illicit assets. Why are we trying to spot illicit assets? To stop them or get them back. Like the parent in all of this is asset recovery. It's combating crime effectively. So I think that there'll be lots of exciting opportunities, I think, in this space. But what the UK does next, what happens with the EU and how sort of MiCA truly rolls out and is implemented. I think your industry in particular in compliance is in for a bumpy couple of years, but one person's bump is someone else's sort of elevation and someone else's misery. So I think there's going to be a lot of activity. There'll be plenty of topics to be discussed.
I think that, as a closing point, I think a lot, you say it's the parent, but I think people have left it as like the orphan child, where it's like, they're so worried about the optics of how much we seized and, who went to jail and what color or ethnicity they were and how many years they get. I don't hear very many people giving us follow-ups like, hey, you remember those seized assets? We sold those seized assets. You don't hear very much of that happening at all in the media. So I think as much as we want to say, like, this is the whole point, we're like, we've added so much complexity, so many political statements, and, anything that happens is like, if it doesn't have that political angle, then, the media doesn't want to talk about it. A truck driver kills somebody in Florida by making an illegal U-turn. It's not about, well, what about the victim's family? It's about, are they unidentified? And, what are we going to do with them? And like, we're going to arrest them and bring them back. And I'm like, why is that guy flying on a private jet to be brought back to Florida from it? Like, I'm like, how much did that cost? Like, it's all these things that we're not talking about. But when I saw that jet, I'm like, that man took a better plane than I did to Florida. We need to discuss why he didn't take a Greyhound with an officer beside him. But it's so funny how much now the media plays into the way we treat certain crimes, and, recovering these assets and putting it back into the victim's pocket actually seems like the least of our worries until now.
It's our closing sort of, it's our mission. Our mission is there is no accountability really in the asset recovery sector. When people talk about, I've recovered X, we want them to say, of what? No one actually knows what that recovery is. There's no context around it. And I think there's no data. And it's the old, you can't manage what you can't measure. I mean, there is no accountability. Look how much blockchain analytic information now exists, hotly contested, but there's lots of people saying lots of things. Yeah. Whereas the asset recovery statistic I talked about, the 1%, that was collated in 2011. That then was re-upped by Europol of a data set from 2011 to 2014. There's nothing being measured in 11 years. So for us, it's a good creating that accountability, as you said. We talk about when someone gets arrested. We talk about how many years they got. We rarely talk about how much did we get back, and that's our money as members of the public. You literally pay more tax in Canada because of the lack of returns, for example. In the UK, it's actually broken down in your council tax bill. It says, Police and Crime Commissioner, money going to police force. I'm like, well, can we get a slice of the trillions that are being laundered globally? And let's put that in. Let's reinvest that. I mean, Aaron West, wouldn't Aaron love to be able to have an Operation Shamrock initiative funded by forfeited funds? You could have drug rehabilitation forfeited by, you could have better law enforcement tools and training all funded by. So for us, that asset recovery sort of flywheel, if we can play our part with all the other parts. But I think for your predominant listener group, people don't realize that some of the biggest cases in the world all started off with a SAR being filed. So like compliance plays such an important role in being the genesis of some of the biggest, most interesting cases. Big case in Australia where they were laundering proceeds of crime using classic cars, crypto assets, all started from a bank teller going, something seems strange.
Right.
And these cases wouldn't be started. So I think the whole system sort of all working together. And like you say, if we're sitting here in a year's time and we're starting to talk about asset recovery statistics, countries collect them, but without context. And I would love to start seeing sort of global asset recovery statistical information. Maybe that's a follow-up for this time next year. See where we are.
Yeah, who's going to survey the 40 agencies? And who's going
to go? We will, because we'll have all the data. So we will.
Exactly, and that's what we're waiting for. Report from you.
We need permission. This is the difference. We need permission to share that information. So that's the big deal. We have the data. We're not a blockchain analytic company. We don't have public data that we can talk about. So I can tell you right now how some countries are doing, but of course I'm not permitted to. And that's what we want. We want that information more in the public domain. UK publishes asset recovery statistics. The US publishes statistics, but again, it's not contextualized. And I think there's more work to be done in that space. And we take a leaf out of the blockchain analytic industry. going, there's all these amazing, really interesting reports that are submitted every year.
Right.
They're contested and debated. That's a good thing. I want to see the same for asset recovery.
I love it. Aidan, I know people can find you on LinkedIn. Do you spend any time on crypto Twitter, or is that just too much for you?
No, I am. I'm too old and I refuse to call it X, so I still call it Twitter as well. So yeah, Aidan J. Larkin between Twitter and LinkedIn is where you'll find me ranting.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining. One piece of advice I'll leave you with every single time we have a conversation, and we talk fairly regularly. I see a lot of the content you put out. I learn something different. I challenge you to have a conversation, whether it's in a camera to somebody else every single day for a whole month, and just to see how much different information you can provide, because none of the information is, I've heard you talk about asset reality. Every time we have a conversation, I learned something completely different, some nuance of the industry. I know we've talked about doing like a weekly
that could
wrap
be a compliment or an insult, because it's like you never stay on point as well.
No, because I think you've listened to enough podcasts. It's like if you listen to the same person on 8 different podcasts, they have that same message, usually directing people to buy their book in the context of their book. But I think what's interesting about you is like you're having different conversations every single day. You're researching different things every day, and it adds so much context and richness to your points. Aidan Larkin, thank you so much for joining Around the Coin podcast.
Much appreciated.